I think we can all agree that scenes like this are genuinely heartbreaking and something needs to be done about them. So when MrBeast and Mark Rober announced Team Seas, a fundraiser to collect £30 million of trash out of the ocean, I knew that in one way or another I had to get involved. Which is why I've decided to create a game in a couple of days to encourage people to be proactive towards the rising levels of trash in our oceans. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, we create a new project in Unity, and the first logical step for a game about the oceans is, well, the oceans. So we need to decide how the water should look, and originally I was thinking about making everything physics-based and having waves, but I felt that might be a little too sluggish for a game like this, so I started looking into alternatives. I found this blog post from Kainga's devlog. So I imported a plane to test the shader out on, and I went off trying to make something similar. I managed to make this depth effect, and the basics of how it works is the further something is from the camera, the more black it'll become, but obviously water isn't black, so I mapped all the black parts to a dark blue and the white to a light blue. Then I made some refraction, which just wiggles the underwater stuff by offsetting the vertices by some noise, which surprisingly is actually much easier than it sounds. We just scroll a displacement map over the top of our water material, which will squash and stretch anything viewed through it. So at this point the water felt almost there, but like it was missing something, so I added some foam to it. Except that's not quite what happened, as since that last clip, 3 hours have elapsed, because my dumbass decided it would be a good idea to rewrite the entire shader from scratch 2 more times, and now it's 3 hours behind, and now no plastic will be taken out of the ocean, and it's all thanks to me. And finally, I changed around the colours to something I liked, and yeah, water. So I want the play area of this game to be pretty small, which means we need some sort of boundary around the outside of the water. And in real life, there's this stuff called land that the oceans surround. But the biggest issue right now is it looks bad, like really, really bad. So I decided to flatten it out into a more beachy shape around the outside rather than those ugly mountains.
That still looks
Okay, so I modelled some trees and bushes in Blender and painstakingly scattered those around the beaches.
Okay, you have to be trolling. Is there a reason it looks so
Clearly though, that wasn't good enough, so I needed to add something pretty big, and what better kick in the balls to trash in our oceans than coral? So now the player is going to feel a sense of dread that if they don't clean up the oceans, they're killing the coral. Shame on you. Shame on you. The way coral spawning works is very simple. First off, we need some colours for our coral and a placeholder to represent the coral itself. And once we've got that, we can start to spawn it. So welcome to Coral Spawning 101. Step 1, create a script for our coral spawner. Step 2, create some parameters for our spawn radius, coral amount, coral materials and coral game objects. Step 3, create a for loop where we loop up to our coral amount. Step 4, generate a random colour. Step 5, then use some wacky trigonometry to define a position inside of a circle that the coral will spawn in. Step 6, shoot a ray down until it hits something, spawn the coral, and use the normal of the surface to rotate the coral into the correct orientation. Step 7, randomly scale the coral and adjust its position. And that's it, we now have coral spawning. So now the coral is spawning, I made some new models that weren't, well, The final thing that was bothering me was the way that the sand looked, so I searched online for some textures before coming across one I liked. I then pulled it into Photoshop, turned the intensity way down, and finally applied it to the sand. Lastly, I added some post-processing effects, and that's pretty much the environment sorted. So while the environment's done, we still need some sort of gameplay for the player, and I thought really hard about it, and remembered that boats go in the ocean, and therefore I could make a boat in my game. So I got to work on modelling a boat in Blender and textured it up in Unity, and holy shit, that's a nice looking boat if I do say so myself. The way that most boats function is there's a rudder at the back as well as a motor, so I created a rudder transform to use as a place to add force and rotate the boat from. So onto the movement. Firstly, I tried adding forces and torque to the boat at the rudder's position, but this felt way too sluggish. So I made it more responsive by increasing the force if you're travelling in a different direction to the last frame. Then I implemented drag, which already was feeling pretty much how I wanted it. So I played around with those values until I got something I liked, and yeah, that's our movement. So next up, I started working on the boat's visuals, and currently it just looks like it's floating, which is super scuffed. So I created some particles for the motor using the particle system. I followed that up by using a wiggly trail renderer to make something that somewhat resembled ripples, and got that working pretty nicely. One thing that really bothers me about our boat though is that it's supposed to be doing good for the environment, yet it has a massive ass exhaust hanging out the back, so I deleted it and got to work on another solution. Woo! Propeller baby! And before one of you asks, but Barji, you know the boat propellers are powered by shut up! Shut the hell up. So now we've given the players some control over the game, we need to give them an objective. The idea is that the trash will be distributed around the oceans and the player will have 60 seconds to collect as much of it as possible. So spawning trash is essentially just spawning coral, so I created a trash spawning script and tweaked the code so that it will work with trash. As you can see, it works really well already, but those things floating around the ocean hardly look like trash. So I started modeling a wine bottle, a takeaway container, and an oil barrel, textured them up in Unity, and integrated them into the trash spawning script. Currently the trash is just floating in place, so I added a small force and rotation where they spawn, so that they float around in the water. Next up, I made the trash collectible. It basically just scales down when you hit it. So that's pretty much it for the gameplay, but we currently have no game loop. So I created some UI for the timer and the trash that you've collected. And then I may have added online leaderboards. We'll see how that goes. I then downloaded a ton of sound effects from the internet and implemented those, and my friends Elijah and Justin made some songs / ambience for the game that you can hear now. And finally, I made a main menu to wrap everything up. And yeah, that's how I created my game REEF in 2 days. I hope in some way this motivated you to check out the TeamSeas website in the description, where you can donate and view all about the cause. And oh yeah, my good friend PolyMars is hosting a TeamSeas game jam if you're a seasoned game developer or a first timer who wants to give it a go. Head over to that page where you'll have a week to make a nautical themed game. But yeah, thank you for watching and I'll see you very soon.